Welcome to another in our continuing series of podcasts about the Bickelhaupt Arboretum, located in Clinton, Iowa. The mission of the Bickelhaupt Arboretum is to serve as a connection between people and plants through a better understanding of horticulture by developing and maintaining a well-documented collection of landscape plants adapted to this region for education and enjoyment. Education has always been a centerpiece of the Arboretum ever since the first collections were planted in 1970. Initially, this education focused mainly on using the collections to show people the diversity and the options that were available to them in terms of woody plants and shrubs that could be used in their areas. It soon became clear, though, that other forms of education were needed. Everything from explaining what an arboretum was to helping people better understand their role in the environment in general. This process has evolved a lot since the beginning, from workshops about gardening and pruning given to the general public to the thousands of local elementary children that have gone through educational programs at the Arboretum. The Bickelhaupt's daughter, Francie Hill, explains how initially the process of educating people about the Arboretum was one of the biggest obstacles, and she talks about how some of the educational programs that are still in use today have come about.
Were there any obstacles with this process of developing an Arboretum early on?
Yes, because the lack of education that they had, but they went ahead and got some education. Not just in Clinton, all over the United States. But you know what I mean? It was environment, didn't really mean anything. So that was the biggest obstacle, I think, was educating. And we still have that.
We still do. It's a huge deal.
People don't understand, and I think that's the biggest obstacle.
Yeah, it's getting people to realize, what like you have said, nobody, to this day at times, nobody still knows what an arboretum is in a lot of ways, and their idea of it is much different than what it actually is.
I think the difficulty is when the botanic garden is one thing and arboretum's the other.
Exactly.
And this is woody plants as opposed to
herbaceous
native plants.
Yep.
And I don't think I've been to several botanic gardens, and they got the orchids and they got a lot of exotics, which is wonderful. People can look at those and they can look at this.
Yeah.
But there's no point in looking at exotics and thinking you're going to grow them in Clinton, Iowa.
No.
It's not going to fly.
Not in your house, probably.
No. Not even in your house. Right?
Not even in your house, believe me. On that educational part, how do the educational programs develop at the Arboretum?
They started doing classes at the Arboretum. They started first with the Park District.
Okay.
Because someone said you should get the Arboretum to the Park District someday, because that would be a good idea. Well, there's a changing membership because the Park District, I think they vote for them, don't they? At that time, they were voting for them. And there were changes and things like that, how that was going on. And my dad didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep it going for himself and then see what they would do. So I think he felt that at one point, Mr. Nordine said, you should teach classes. He said, I'm not qualified. He said, yes, you are, yes, you are. So because his name was kind of well known, because he was a car dealer and everything, so he decided that they would go and so they had some classes at the Arboretum. Then they started going to the schools with education. And that was before No Child Left Behind. And so the schools were thrilled about it.
Now, if you go to them at times, and I've done this with some teachers, or they've come to me and said, here's my benchmarks, here's my standards, can you develop something that we can do together?
That's what
And at times I'm like, here's how I can fit everything that you want to hear into how you want it
in that time frame.
In that time frame, in your standards and your benchmarks. So
right.
It can be a difficult thing these days with the amount of regulations and stuff that are in the schools to try and make it so that they still want the same thing, but it's just got to be put in a different box now, it seems.
Right. So I think the greatest obstacle, going back to it, is education. And if that can be done, and I know it can be done with Clinton Community College, if that can be done, then I think every mission, every goal, every vision they had would be fulfilled.
Okay.
I really do.
During that whole education process, especially early on, or even later on, I guess, what role did you play in it? In terms of the planning or the implementing or the developing of anything?
You've already heard the story.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I'm doing a tour one time of children, and I can't remember where they were. The first thing, it was a hot day. I think it was Park District summer program. And I said, we should all just take our shoes off and just feel the grass. And then one girl said, don't do that, Mrs. And she didn't know my name, Mrs. Hill. And I said, don't call me Francie. Don't do that, you can be poisoned. And I said, why? And what do you mean? She said, well, the landlord said we could be poisoned because he sprayed the grass. And I said, we don't spray the grass here, it's okay. Really? And so they took their shoes off. So we got to the top of the hill, and I said, so how many of you ever rolled down a hill? How do you do it? And I was at the time in my 60s, and so I said, well, watch. And I rolled down, and they thought it was just amazing for me to see that children hadn't had that experience at all. I mean, some children in Clinton, live in Clinton, have never seen the Mississippi River. I know that's terribly hard to believe,
but that's
really true.
I can believe it.
And so it was an outdoor classroom.
Yeah.
So we started as a protest to No Child Left Inside. I turned it into No Child Left Behind. I turned it into No Child Left Inside. And that program went for about 7 years. even before the pandemic. I think it had to do with funding and the buses and things like that.
The buses always seem to be a big issue.
It really, and yet the bus drivers loved it.
Oh, yeah.
They off the bus. They
sure
thought it
they
was
did.
great. Had to remind him not to smoke. It was not a smoke break in the parking lot. But yeah. And prom, after prom, years ago, it was trash. They'd come out and take the pictures, just trash. And that was before Instamatic, our cameras. So it was film laying around and everything. And after probably 7 or 8 years of No Child Left Inside, those kids are, then have grown up.
They've grown up.
They have an ownership. And we went out the one day, I wrote a story about it, and all we found was a piece of ribbon and a quarter. I mean, nothing, no damage or anything like that. And really, we have been very blessed. There's been very little damage. The few times that there were a few things that ended up not looking real good the next morning, but we chose not to publicize it because it might give people an idea. But there's been very little vandalism, and that's just great.
That is.
For a public area.
And part of that had to do with, the
I think
education.
it's education.
Yeah.
Letting children, young people feel empowered and feel...
So that this is part of your community.
Right,
so
right.
why would you want to,
Right.
want to mess it up?
Right, exactly.
A majority of the educational programs that occur at the Arboretum have been organized for the past 11 years by Margo Hansen, who was the Director of Programs for the Arboretum. In setting up these programs, her tasks have included planning, organizing, and the logistical coordinating with area schools to ensure that many local elementary children have the opportunity to learn more about the plants and the environment at the Arboretum. Of course, she would not be able to do all of this if it weren't for the help of an army of volunteers who have dedicated their time and knowledge to this purpose as well. Margo, along with the volunteers Joyce Oley, Raymond Smith, and Marion Johnson, shared with us some of their insights into the topics they discuss, the obstacles they sometimes come across, and information that they share with the people that visit the Arboretum.
School district was very adamant about the fact that we had to teach to the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. So was that one of those things where as you guys developed the program, or as the program was being developed and updated and things, you would have to have conversations with the teachers and things like that?
Well, we had to look at what the written curriculum was and go by that.
Okay.
You were instrumental in doing a lot of that. Also, we had to talk to the curriculum supervisors a couple of times. They came over and because we were teaching a 4th grade, and they decided that whatever we were teaching, what was it, leaves or something, that they were doing something different for 4th grade, so we could no longer offer No Child Left Inside to 4th graders because our program did not involve what they wanted to, or they were learning.
It didn't cover what they call their standards and benchmarks,
Yes.
Right.
if you will.
So we dropped the 4th grade and then we picked up kindergarten.
Oh,
So it
okay.
is kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade is what we've done in the past. So we invite 1st and 2nd grade in the spring, 2nd and 3rd in the fall. So over the course of the years, if you are in a Clinton school, elementary school, you would come here 4 times
Yes.
while you're in.
Well, you're now over the course of your entire
Right,
time.
right.
Exactly.
So everybody, all these young people, little people, know what an arboretum is, and it's kind of fun because not every community has that opportunity.
And most recently, they also know the word photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis.
Yes.
It's a big word for a first
It
grader.
is a big word for a first grader.
Yes.
There are some college students that don't know the word yet, despite me telling them over and over again.
And that's it. I mean, that's our whole living, our life depends on photosynthesis.
One of the bonuses to having the No Child Left Inside, besides having the kids come, is that some of the schools would invite their parents. And so we'd have a lot of parents coming with us, and it was amazing how many adults said, "Oh, I didn't know that." And we'd be asking questions to the kids, and the parents would look like, "Why, we don't know." I mean,
Or I've never been here, and
Yes.
they've been here
Yes,
for the
right.
first time.
So it wasn't just a learning experience for the kids in the classes, a learning experience for everybody involved, kids on through adults, through parents, through whole family units potentially, depending on who was chaperoning that day and doing those kind of things.
We have groups of like Sarah Harding. It's a retirement center. It's been here.
there are garden clubs.
Garden
Yes.
club,
Come.
and so there's groups other than school
Other than
groups.
the school groups, yeah.
Come
Now, do you have to? My guess is that when the other groups come that aren't the school groups, my guess is you don't do the No Child Left Inside
No.
program. You have different sort
They
of.
they kind of have their own questions,
Okay.
and it's
It's a basic tour of the
It's a basic
Arboretum
tour of
for
the
them.
Arboretum. Okay.
Right. At one time, we had weekend time set up, and a volunteer would show up, and if somebody came from the community and wanted a tour, we would give it to them. If there was nobody there, we'd go home.
We talk about roots. Well, do you like to eat roots? Oh, no, don't want to eat roots. And, well, do you like carrots? Yeah, I like carrots. And understanding that a carrot is a root is something that most kids have no concept of. And, they, what's color are trees? Well, they're green for the most part. And what does that mean? And then you can get into the idea that we need trees on this earth to provide oxygen and use carbon dioxide, and all that,
Which brings us to the name of the program. The educational systems had a program called No Child Left Behind. But then, and I forget the author's name, but there was a book out, No Child Left Inside, saying that outdoor education is not just learning about where our food comes from, but the air we breathe, everything about our life depends on what's outside, the environment.
The ecosystem as a whole,
Yes.
sort of thing, and knowing that we're actually in it and not outside of it.
A lot of children were not getting outside, particularly urban children. And so the program, Francie picked it out after reading the book, and she's, No Child Left Inside. So unless it was raining hard, all the programs were outside. And it was wonderful.
One of the things that I think is really good about the No Child Left Inside program is that students are exposed to other people who are interested in the environment. I mean, and my feeling is children should know what their environment is. If you want to say we're trying to save the environment, this is what we're trying to save.
Yeah.
And this is here we all are, and we're all concerned, all of the
Yeah, so unless you show them, specifically what is your environment, it's a very abstract concept
Exactly.
for them. And getting them, in that younger age is also a way that those sorts of things and that kind of knowledge can be built up over time, so that as they get older, it's not a new concept to them either. It's something that they've been learning about and gaining more knowledge, more detailed knowledge as they get older.
Going back to what Ray had said earlier about walking around and looking at the different trees, what color are trees, they're green. But it goes a little bit further in that these volunteers point out the different kinds of trees. So it's not just trees. Trees have names, trees have sizes and shapes and different colors and have different, purposes, maybe a food source for one animal or one bird. They point that out, and maybe some kids hadn't realized that before. In addition to that, they point out the difference between deciduous trees and the conifers, the needled plant material versus the trees that drop and bushes that drop their leaves in the fall. So all these things that maybe they'd never heard about or their parents don't talk about, it's just like, okay, let's go rake the leaves. Well, they don't really understand that that's part of a classification.
Yeah.
But that trees have names and they do have different characteristics, just like people. A lot of those things that we take for granted are pointed out to these students, and it's a light bulb goes off in their head, and it's like, oh, that's cool.
And they start looking at their surroundings in a much different way now that they've become more familiar with what is actually there compared to just a tree they kept walking by every day.
And even though we're an arboretum and we focus on woody plant material, there are still birds flying over, or you can hear the birds singing. You can see little fish or turtles or frogs in the creek that runs through. And even the clouds and the insects and the butterflies and just all of that in one big package here at the Arboretum. It just makes it whole. And back to what Marion said, that's our environment, and that's what we're trying to save. And that's just a very important point that she brought up.
I think one of the exciting things, too, is the butterfly garden.
Oh, yeah.
And, the monarch butterfly has been always kind of an emphasis here. And to realize that monarch butterfly will, as a species, travels all the way to Mexico.
I know.
I mean, kids just have no idea
Yeah.
that those sort of things happen, what happens in the wintertime. Just the whole migratory
The whole process.
nature.
Yeah,
the
and to know that
process.
it happens on many, many levels. It's not just this large bird like a goose or a swan or anything like that. It's all the way down to this insect level. You've got something moving very large spans in a way that we still in some ways don't understand how it happens, why it happens, how they know the way, all of those sorts of things. And you guys are doing it on a more local level because, as you guys have all said, this is the environment they live in. When these children are put on these buses and brought here, they're not brought here from across the state. They're brought here from 10 minutes away, in a town that they already live in, to see all of this stuff that they maybe didn't know was already in their area.
We should include the Comanche school children in because we have classes come from Comanche. Right?
Okay.
So
They do the No Child Left Inside program? Okay,
Yes.
so we're not just talking about just all Clinton kids. We're talking Clinton, Comanche. Were there any other school districts that were brought
no,
in?
but we had some homeschool children
Okay.
once in a while.
And then we do entertain other groups throughout the year. So we have the summer camps that come, and we do have other classes and ages that come that get a program kind of tailored to what their needs and what their requests are. So we want to fit it to the group that's coming. We did a few times do a scavenger hunt, so that was really fun, and that again was geared toward the age that was coming. One of them that I recall was actually they were junior high or high school, and they were given a map, and it was not only doing the scavenger hunt at the Arboretum, but it was following a map.
Oh, yeah, map skills.
And map skills, and some of them in the world of GPS now, it was a little challenging. So it was really fun because they had to figure out the map, north, south, east, west, and landmarks and things like that. So that was really fun. And back to No Child Left Inside, Joyce had mentioned parents coming, and we had parents and some grandparents come. But it was really fun one day. We had a group of No Child Left Inside students come, and one of the students' grandfathers came. And Ray, you might have told me this story, I don't remember. But they're going around, and the volunteer teachers are asking questions to the student as they're going around the Arboretum. And every time they ask a question, this grandfather would shout out the answer. He was so excited and so happy and had never been here. And he had more fun than the kids. And finally, he realized that they were asking the students the questions, and he finally caught on. But it was really funny because he was so excited, he just would blurt out the answer every time they asked a question. So that made it really fun. It made the event fun, and he had a great time.
One of my favorite teaching moments would come when one of the kids would see a bee.
Oh, yeah.
And the first reaction is, screaming and running and, calm down. We are in the bee's home. Just calm down. Just let it be, and to think about that we are the strangers in their environment.
Yeah. So you guys mentioned one obstacle you had in some of these educational programs was getting things aligned for the schools, because they have their benchmarks, their standards, their things like that, and that was one of your big obstacles. It was when I talked to Francie earlier, she said, that was a big issue we always had, was getting that. Were there any other obstacles, though, that came in or challenges with some of these programs that you did in terms of these educational programs? Any of them. It could be the ones for kids or even some of the ones that you may have given for adults and things like that.
Well, I don't know if it's an obstacle, but there was quite a process to go through to contact all of the teachers, give them all the information, give them the dates, have them get back to us and sign up. So when you have that many classes in a certain program, there has to be a lot of coordinating of that. Once we had the classes lined up with the teachers, they had to arrange the busing, and then we had to meet as volunteers. This wonderful army of volunteers meet, and then the volunteers would select the dates that they could help with the program and be here for the students that were coming. So again, it wasn't an obstacle, but it was kind of a challenging and a timeline that we had to really stick to. So, and we had to check and make sure there was nothing else going on throughout the school system, the 2 weeks we were going to be doing it. And then, of course, we had weather issues and canceling and should we have it. And so there were the normal things that you would do with any program in getting them lined up. And then you always have new teachers that don't know the ropes and don't know how it rolls. And then you have the teachers that come year after year that sign up right away because they really enjoy the program and the work that the wonderful volunteers have done in the past.
So when you put that program on, so you got a day that you're going to do it, how many volunteers would you need just for one day?
You need 2 volunteers per classroom. Per classroom. I mean, unit.
Yeah, so not not 2 volunteers for the whole 3rd grade of Clinton, but 2 volunteers for every section of 3rd grade for Clinton.
Correct. And then we'd all meet down at the gathering space, and we'd divide them up according to how many volunteers we had. So we'd often have 6 volunteers. We'd have 3 sections at a time.
Oh, okay.
And then we'd have stations out on the grounds, and we'd head for a different place. We'd all go in different directions, and then we'd rotate around, and there'd be 2 stations per lesson. We had roots at one, and we'd have leaves at another, and
stems, and then the flowers and seeds.
Yeah, and so the curriculum was divided up into 3 groups, but we'd rotate through all of that and get it all done in an hour.
Wow.
Right, and they'd have 15 minutes per station, and then there was walking time and touring time and talking time, and so it really flowed quite well. They would bunch up once in a while, but we managed, and it was they were outside. All kids love field trips. I mean, it was
even when they get older.
Even when they get older.
At each station there were artifacts, so we'd have samples of roots, or we'd have samples of how the leaves are arranged on a stem.
And one of the really fun parts, I thought, and I'm going to let Marion talk about this, were the lima beans and the germinating of seeds in the different parts. So I'm going to let her talk about that process of starting them early and what the kids did with the big lima beans.
Germinated the lima beans, and each child got a lima bean, so we took the seed coat off, and then we saw the little bitty plant inside and the cotyledon and all that. So that's what we did with the kids, so that they had, to me, learning from a book is one thing, and it's great.
It is.
But hands-on in anything, in a laboratory, or that's why I call this a living lab, because you can get hands-on to see the seeds. It took a little bit to figure out how to do this so that we had enough, because sometimes I had to get 300 seeds.
I was going to say, that's a lot of seeds to start.
But it was worth it when you saw, that they, at least this is it. This is how it starts.
Yeah.
Not just in the book with a picture. And that's how actually one of the ways that this No Child Left Inside got started, because someone, I think it was Francie's grandson, she was telling him, that's a paw of something. There's something, some kid said, I can see that on the internet. And you say, aha. No. That's not how, we don't want you just learning stuff from the internet.
Yeah.
It's
got to be hands-on.
Right.
And one thing Marion had to do was she had to count ahead and plan ahead to get the lima bean seeds in the right stage, germinated for the class on the day it was coming. And so there was planning, and she was diligent. Oh my gosh. She always came through, and you have some seeds that don't germinate. So they did share on occasion, but they couldn't wait to have their own seed and find that little plantlet and the tiny little root inside. And they had no clue that was the beginning of a plant and the whole germination process. So that was really fun. And that was just one of many things. We also one time did a seed collecting portion where we actually put tape on their wrist, and it was inside out, and they went around and tried to collect different seed on the grounds. One portion is how do seeds travel. And so we had, the cockleburs that stick and the seeds that roll. And so we had samples of all of those, and then they would look for those as they went around the grounds.
Yeah. So, and a lot of these things, are all, it sounds to me like lessons that at the outset, when you first look at it, you're like, oh, that's just so simple. That is so, I don't know why it is that we didn't think of that before. And yet, none of them require things like, a very high-tech measuring system or any type of electronics or any type of that kind of stuff. And I will tell you right now, in many of my college classes, when you mentioned the lima beans and the soaking them and looking for cotyledons, I did that as graduate work in one of my classes. That's what our instructor had us do. And then what she had us do was we had to weigh them, we had to talk about, and then she goes, throughout the semester, as we talk about things in physiology, you need to add to this as to, okay, why did this happen? How did this happen? You're measuring it now these first couple of weeks, but every week after, you better be adding something about this and this and this and this in terms of the physiology of what's happening in that little seed. And it takes something that simple and just be able to get that much information out of it is really, So we've got No Child Left Inside. How long has that program been going on here at the Arboretum?
I think 20 years,
We think 20
except
years.
for the COVID time.
Short of the COVID time, it's been going on. It was going on for 20 years.
So if you take roughly 20 years, 1,500 students a year, do the math. We'll have to add that in. Do the math. That's a lot of students, and it's interesting now in talking to people that have jobs and have their own kids. They would say, "Oh, I remember coming to the Arboretum. I remember walking around. We love the waterfall. They all love the waterfall. They love the creek." It's interesting now that their children are coming to the Arboretum for the same class, but it's really great to hear them say, "I came here as a student when I was in school." With one program or another.
I get them every once in a while. Some of them who do take my classes at the college, I'll say, "Hey, we're going to the Arboretum." And I'll say, "Oh, I remember the Arboretum. I went there when I was a kid, and I did this, and I did that." And I said, "Well, good. Now we're going to look at it from a different perspective here, and go." And I do get a lot of kids that are like, "Oh, I've never been to the Arboretum. Where is it?" And I was like, "Well, this is a good opportunity for you to learn."
Right.
We really haven't talked about really the major purpose of the Arboretum is as a community resource, is to show people what grows here in Iowa. It's a wonderful educational thing, and when you look at the sign that's posted by the tree, it will tell you when it was planted,
Yep.
so you'll know how big it's going to get before you plant it in your yard. And so for me, this has always been an educational place, not just for kids.
Right. We did something, this is a little different from No Child, but we did put together compost.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can make the compost, with the bottle, the liter bottle, and then all the stuff you put in it. And then you got the red worms, and of course you have to talk about the red worms. So we've done that too, as a different type of
It's a
program.
different type of program,
Yeah, and
or even
then-
project, or even workshop for you.
Yeah, and I think maybe a class would come over, or did we do that for the Saturday Enviro?
Right. So
Enviro
it
Kids?
could have been Enviro Kids.
Explain what the Enviro Kids are.
Yes, Enviro Kids at one time was started through Lyondell Basel, and it was for a program that they supported to go around to environmental-based businesses and organizations. And it's on Saturdays from 10 to noon, and the Arboretum is one of 6 or 7 locations that they go. The Isaac Walton League, the Recycle Center, the Felix Adler Sawmill Museum. I'm going to forget somebody. They go to a ball game, but it's a weekend event for 3rd to 5th graders, and the flyer is sent out to all the schools in the county. Anyone can sign up, and then you can go to these. You get a postcard that says when the next event is
And where it is.
And the Arboretum has been with that for many years, maybe 10 or 12 years. It just gets kids from all over. And the fun thing is we may have 30 or 40 of those students signed up, but then their little siblings come,
Yep.
their parents
They're
come.
there.
So we can have quite a crowd come, all ages, and all are welcome, because we want, the littlest to the oldest to come to the Arboretum, adjust our program to whatever their age or interest is, and just make it a pleasant experience. And it is. We have a lot of fun tour, an educational lesson, and then of course you have to have a little treat at the end.
Yeah,
So.
And it wouldn't be an educational group unless we said the Arboretum is open
Yes.
during the daylight every day of the year.
Free of charge.
Free of
Dawn to
charge.
dusk, free of charge.
As we can see, the Arboretum continues its mission of educating people about the benefits of plants and their role in the environment. While much of this education can be seen in their No Child Left Inside program, there is no shortage to educational opportunities and events that have and can occur at the Arboretum. My many thanks to Margo Hansen, Joyce Ollie, Raymond Smith, and Marion Johnson for sharing their time and insights with me for this podcast, as well as to Otis Welch for the musical selection.